faro shuffle weave. So when you're doing a faro shuffle, you will often see folks on the internet showing the faro, or you may see other magicians doing the faro where they take the cards and they position them like this, and then they try to get them to weave together. And you may see that they do like a lot of sawing actions back and forth, and eventually they'll get them to weave. Although, in my experience, this is a much more difficult way to accomplish a faro shuffle, and I do not recommend this. Can it be done? Yes. Do I recommend it? No. And the reason being is that when you do this, you have really very little control over the contacting surfaces of the cards. So what's happening in the faro is that you have cards, and we'll use these fingers as an example. This is just 4 cards or 8 cards trying to be faroed together. When you're pushing on the cards like this, and from the long outside ends, you basically have very little control of where these cards are actually touching. And what you're trying to do is get them to jam through like this. When you move up closer to the joining point with your hands, and I'll show you that in a moment, you can actually better position the alignment of the cards. So at a macro scale, if the cards are aligned like this, they're going to be much easier to faro. Or in an out faro, they're going to be much easier to faro. But when you have them just butted up against each other and then you're just trying to get them to go, eventually you might force them to go, but you really just have very little control because you're controlling it from the out ends. So what I recommend for a faro is to get your cut, position your fingertip, and here I use my index finger on my right hand, although it may be different for you if you're left-handed. And I use the tip of this as an indicator, or as a marker to kind of feel for the edge. And that at a very close level, you can see I've already got this card just a hair above this card. And all the cards are lined up just a hair above. So that allows for that weaving action to be much more simple to accomplish, because I'm not trying to just force these to be, to mesh, especially from these outer ends. But I'm actually limiting the contact point to a much smaller point and letting them weave naturally, like the fingers did. That one's off by 1, but you can kind of see what's going on there. The other thing is that when you see people using a lot of force, or if you find you're using a lot of force for the faro, you're almost certainly not aligned with the offset of one card. You're most likely butting up almost exactly perfect. Thus, the cards can't pass each other. But if they're up just a little bit, then they can pass into each other. Also, the faro requires a bit of an angle to get the weave to go. So I'm going to show you, try to give you a better angle of what the weave actually looks like. So try to turn the camera here, or turn myself a little bit. See if I can get this. This is not a perfect faro because my cards are off. I don't have 26 and 26. But you can see that once it's started, the cards just want to weave. It requires almost no effort for these to be interleaved. I think I'm off by 1. So I get the edges nice and square, put my finger on the outside point here, line it up so that I can feel that I'm just 1 above, and boom, in we go. Just like that. So if you're finding it taking any amount of effort to push them together, it's most certainly because you don't have enough control because you're too far away from where the action's happening. By bringing it to the fingertips and coming really close, you have much greater control over what's actually happening in the weave. The other point that I'd like to make is that you'll notice that I'm not doing the flat ends to the flat ends like this. While that will work, you will have much more, or at least I find that I have much more success by going with a corner point into the deck. And I like to make the analogy of cutting a tomato. So for an example, visually here I have this tomato, which is actually a clown nose, and we'll use this pocket knife, which I'm going to use the back of the blade so I don't cut my clown nose. So when you're cutting a tomato, if you take the knife and you just go to the tomato and try to cut like this, you're going to meet a lot of resistance and detention of the tomato from the skin not wanting to give one way or the other. So that's why when you're cutting a tomato, often you'll see, like in traditional knife work, like French knife work, they will use kind of a stroking pass. This allows the little sawing action of the burr of your blade to actually abrade the skin and get it sliced, so that get a start, so that then the blade can travel through the tomato. Likewise, if you have a knife, you could just poke into the tomato with the point and then lean it and then pull out and go through that spot, and it'll cut nice and clean. And for this reason, a lot of people use a serrated knife to cut tomatoes, which are just a lot of little points which pierce the skin and allow the blade to pass through. So what does this all mean in terms of the deck of cards? Because that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, if you take a single card and think of it as our blade, and we'll think of our deck as the tomato, if you're trying to take the blade and push it into the the deck, eventually you'll get it to go, but you're causing a lot of stress on the ends of this deck of the card, and you're likely to actually deform the card somewhat. You can tear up the edges, you can make them really rough and harder, you make it even harder to faro. But if you take the point of the corner, you'll find that that wants to go in very easily. Also, you'll notice sometimes, you'll see it a lot when people are doing the faro this way, they'll do this kind of back and forth sawing action. It's very similar to using the French knife method, where you're kind of slicing through. If you go at this with the point, you'll see that the point pierces, and then it's very easy to travel through the deck with that kind of motion. That sawing motion actually makes it easier than just pushing versus sawing. For all of those reasons, this is why I recommend just using a corner and piercing into the side. And it doesn't matter where you do it. You can do the corner into the end. It really doesn't make any difference, but try to avoid those kind of flat to flat faros, because you will have much more control over the cards, and really it all just comes down to finding that point where they're not butting against each other, but they're just a hair off like that, so that they just want to weave. And you'll see that the little bit of pressure that you give, it will often be at an angle that causes them to open up. And if you watch the zipper-like action that happens with the faro, you can kind of see it opening up. It's doing this. So hopefully that helps.